you so much for joining us today, Rejji.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience being one of the very few African-American CFOs in a Fortune 500 company?
Yeah, sure. I would say I feel quite honored to be in the role that I'm in. Obviously, very difficult to get to this level, but what I've tried to do to get where I am today is on a daily basis, wherever I've been, just exhibit consistently leadership qualities, competence, integrity, and work ethic, and that's generally allowed me to do well. Now, what I'll say is fairly unique about being one of the few African-American CFOs of a Fortune 500 company is that you do get this unique level of pressure when you're in a role like this, because you feel like, well, gee whiz, if I don't do well in this role, then there may be others who look like me that may not get an opportunity after I'm done. And so that's one thing that's, I think, a fairly unique level of pressure that you have, and there's this need or desire to feel like you need to be perfect.
What do you, in your estimation, what has been the progress made so far?
I would say I look at progress a couple of ways. So from a professional perspective, I recall, I've been in this country for now 45 years, and so 70s, 80s, 90s, I just don't recall reading about or seeing on TV senior executives of Fortune 500s who looked like me, male or female. I just don't recall seeing that. And so certainly as we've gotten into the late 90s, into the aughts and beyond, you do see Ken Chenault, former CEO of Amex, Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck. You've now got Roz Brewer, who's the COO of Starbucks, Kathy Waller, CFO of Coke. And so there has been, I'll say, a bit more representation of African Americans in senior corporate roles, but we can always do better. But I do think there has been progression for sure.
In your opinion, what has been the state of racial progress over the years?
Yeah, so I would say, in the U.S., I think there's been gradual progression each decade, at least in my lifetime. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and certainly the 80s were better than the 70s, and the 90s were better than the 80s. But you have this kind of sort of chutes and ladders, or peaks and valleys within every decade, where even though there's progression, there's still steps back from time to time. And so when I think of the 90s, you had Rodney King and the situation in LA. That was obviously, I'd say, more clearly a chute as opposed to a ladder. And then the aughts were better than the 90s, but then as we got into the aughts, you've got Trayvon Martin, you've got Tamir Rice, you've got Sandra Bland, and so you do have these periods where you've just seen things that you would like to think are in our past in the U.S., but you get these occasional reminders. But I'd say just, again, generally speaking, we have seen progress in each decade in the U.S. And going back to my examples on the corporate side, certainly there's more representation of a diverse workforce, and particularly of African Americans at senior levels of Fortune 500s than we had when I was growing up. But we could obviously do better, but we are, I think, in a better position now than we were in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really enjoy having you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.